So today I want to talk about the conscious, the subconscious, the unconscious, and the shadow parts of our aspect in our human psyche and our human nature. And I want to definitely explain the difference between the subconscious and the unconscious, and then how they also are very much intertwined with our nervous systems. And understanding the differences definitely changes the way we understand identity, healing, self-sabotage, manifestation culture, shadow work, and even spiritual transformation. You know, especially with manifestation culture, a lot of people, they want to manifest the life they want. We consciously are trying to create lives that we want to live, well, completely unaware, though, of the deeper systems that are driving our behavior underneath that awareness, the subconscious and the unconscious. And so we need to learn about these things because it's not that esoteric. Wisdom does not work. That shit's very powerful, and it does in fact work because I have fucked around and found out with it. It's the fact that we have things that are blocking us. And so like Wild Coyote, we're starting to run towards that new identity, and then boom, we hit the wall. And we're like, what the hell? I thought this was a road. You know, think of the Titanic with the iceberg. We have this 10% that we're trying to manifest our reality with, not realizing that there is a whole huge piece of ice underneath the water that is going to completely sabotage our ship, you know, sabotage our vessel, and make us sink back into our old identity aspect. And so first off, I want to start simple. Let's start with the conscious mind. Okay, this is our 10% aspect of our mind. It's approximately 10%. You know, you see it in the symbolism with, let's say, the Bible. You know, you're supposed to tie 10% to God. Think about things that are good, lovely, pure. Give thanks in all circumstances. This right here, because the conscious mind is very much your active awareness, okay? I'm going to write that down. This is very much your active awareness, and it is your logical thinking. It is your decision making, your focus, your analyzing, your short-term awareness. And this is very much the part of you that says, I want success. I want love. I want to grow. I want to change my life. I want a new car. I want a new job. I want a new identity. It is the conscious aspects of you. But the conscious mind is only a small little fraction of this ginormous iceberg of a pyramid, okay? And the conscious mind is only a small fraction of what runs the human behavior. And most behavior is automatic, okay? Think of a autopilot. You know, you put your car on autopilot and it's just going down the road, and you're kind of like consciously there making sure you don't hit a pedestrian 10 points or miss a red light, but it is not fully there. Think of a computer. If you've got a program running underneath, which is the subconscious mind, and this is where we do enter the subconscious mind and the unconscious mind, because the subconscious mind is very much like the program layer directly beneath the conscious awareness. So it's that computer program that is running in the background, and you don't even know it's there keeping everything going, but it very much is. And think of it as your internal autopilot system. Okay, again, car's on autopilot, your vessel's just going, woohoo! And this is very much the subconscious stores. Okay, your habits, your emotional conditioning, your learned behaviors and beliefs, your identity patterns, nervous system expectations, behavioral loops, associations, and automatic responses. And this is where your conditioning lives. And so this is very much in the subconscious where your conditioning lives. And so as a child growing up, you learn to associate certain things with certain beliefs. And so, for example, if growing up you learned that visibility led to criticism, that success created pressure, that conflict created danger, money created guilt, or love created abandonment, your subconscious stored those associations. So, for example, I grew up in very much a scarcity, poverty home. And so I had a lot of guilt and shame around money, especially when I'd have to go ask my mother for something, like let's say new shoes. You would pray to God that woman was in the best mood of her life, or else you would get a verbal whiplashing of why we didn't have money and why money didn't grow on trees, and oh, I just bought you shoes 6 months ago and everything else. So it was like, oh, shame, I can't ask for that. I have to shrink myself. I have to make myself smaller. So now as an adult, you may consciously want more money. You might say, I want $10,000 a month, or I want success, or whatever it is. But subconsciously, because of those associations of past memories and stored emotions, your system may interpret that success or that money as unsafe. And because of that, you will begin to unconsciously, okay, this is where we move into the unconscious, start to procrastinate, start to freeze, avoid, self-sabotage, shrink, overthink, and abandon opportunities. And that's the nervous system. That's where nervous system regulation very much comes in. And the subconscious and unconscious also works together to deflect. So when I work with my clients, I'll be like, so why don't you feel like you're worthy of having $80,000, $90,000 a year? And usually the first response across the board is, I don't know. And they'll try to deflect. And that's the unconscious and the subconscious starting to deflect and shut down because it feels uncomfortable. But we have to learn to sit with that discomfort, because it's in that discomfort that we also learn to start to regulate the emotions and realize that they don't have to be the driving benefactor of who we are. So it's not that you're lazy, and it's not that you're incapable of making that money, and it's not because you don't want that money or success, but it's because the subconscious very much prioritizes familiar and survival. It does not care about your dreams. It does not prioritize your dreams. It prioritizes keeping you alive in what's familiar, but just because something is familiar does not mean that's the limit to your greatness. It just means that's all you've known up until this point, and now you need to give your nervous system a new experience to regulate with. And this is why people can very much consciously desire one thing while repeatedly behaving in opposing actions. And Freud believed that beneath the conscious and the subconscious part of our mind was an even deeper layer known as the unconscious. And Freud believed that the unconscious contained repressed trauma, hidden fears, instincts, suppressed desires, painful memories, and unresolved childhood materials. So all of this, think of your mind like a house. You got to be the master of your house. The Bible says you've got all of these boxes now in this house, in this basement of your mind, that you don't want to open, that you don't want to go near, that you don't want to touch because they're uncomfortable, they're painful. We suppress them, we avoid them, we reject them, but they don't go away. Okay, and since we are spiritual beings and we live on the mental plane, the spiritual plane, and the physical plane, we exist on 3 planes. And what is invisible in the mental and in the emotional will very much over time manifest itself into our physical realities. Disease is dis-ease in the body, and that's also something else that I personally love studying with my work is body mapping. This has honestly been going on since I was 16, because I used to be a very sick child. I went paralyzed from the neck down for over 12 hours, and none of the doctors knew what was going on with me. And so I started studying belief systems. I'm realizing, hey, maybe I'm making myself sick. Maybe there's something going on in my energy field. And that's when I started realizing there were people's works out there. You have the Chinese medicine, you have the body mapping over there, and then I believe it's Louise Hayes. She has her belief systems, and I found that interesting. So then, like a scientist does, I started mapping and charting. I would question people of like, hey, you've got lower back pain. Did you lift something heavy by chance? Because we have to look at the physical, but then if it's like, no, okay, it's like, do you by chance have money fears? Are you stressed about bills right now? And they'd be like, yeah. And I'd be like, interesting. She said that's what it's related to. Check. And I would start watching the patterns. But very much this makes people sick. Okay, the energy just gets stored in your energy field. And if it's not worked through, if those emotions aren't worked through and they're stored over time, they will manifest themselves as physical elements in the body. Because things pushed out of conscious awareness that we avoid still influence our behavior from underneath, because Freud believed that what is repressed does not disappear, but it leaks out through emotional reactions, triggers, compulsions, anxieties, projections, and self-sabotage. My grandmother, anytime you would confront this woman growing up, she would immediately resort to acting like a 12-year-old child. And I don't know if you've ever seen a 12-year-old when you're trying to have a conversation and they get upset, they kind of slam doors. I don't want to talk to you. That was very much my grandmother. And she would go from being a 6-year-old woman to a 12-year-old girl like that. And at first I would question, like, what the hell is going on? Like, why can't you have a confrontational conversation right now? Like, I'm literally just trying to talk to you. And she would go into her room and slam the door. But then I realized that at 12 years old, she was stabbed in the hand with a fork by her mother because she didn't prepare dinner quick enough. And she had a lot of siblings, very much the Great Depression kind of era raising mentality. And so that memory very much got suppressed, that trauma very much got suppressed, and therefore they would come back up because what we don't integrate, we deflect with, and then we become reactive to life because we are not in control of our chariots. Another example is consciously somebody can say with active awareness, I want a healthy love, I want a healthy relationship. But if they've got unconscious wounds and trauma, if they've got abandonment wounds, fear of intimacy, fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability, if they had an emotionally immature mother or an absent father, now they have a mother wound or a father wound or both operating within the unconscious, those unconscious fears begin driving behaviors automatically. And I see it time and time again in relationships. So for example, I knew this guy this one time in our friend group. He wanted a loving, supportive relationship. He wanted to find a good girl, settle down, get married. And he found that girl, found this good woman, best woman he'd ever met. But because of his unresolved trauma with the mother wound, it did not matter how kindly she treated him. He constantly was rejecting that love. And then ultimately she removed herself from the situation because she's like, I'm not going to be treated like this. And he just keeps repeating that cycle. And so we have to realize our unconscious, what we are refusing to take accountability and responsibility for, is our driving often results of our sabotage and the reasons why we are not where we want to be. And our mental health might not necessarily be our fault. It's not our fault that our parents were emotionally immature and that they also were like wounded children trying to raise children. But our mental health now is 100% our responsibility in creating a life that we want to live. And the more we work through this, if we just, get over doing the dirty tasks that we don't want to do in cleaning our house, then our house is clean and it's peaceful. And even Carl Jung expanded that model of Freud's because he believed that Freud's model was incomplete. He believed that there was more than just the unconscious, and Carl agreed that the unconscious contained pain and repression, but he also believed that it contained creativity, wisdom, symbolism, archetypes, unrealized potential, and spiritual transformation. And this is where Jung's work becomes incredibly powerful. And if you haven't read any of his work, a few gateway drug books into his work would be A Man and His Symbols and then The Undiscovered Self. I highly recommend those. There's also by Clarissa, A Women Who Run with the Wolves. She studied his work and his philosophies, and she also studies the feminine archetype, women who run with the wolves, of course. Wild and woman are not two things a woman needs to be told that she is, but it's often suppressed. And so she studies the stories and archetypes of women. That book for me, honestly, life-changing. I literally read that book like every year and a half because I love it that much. Anyway, getting back on topic. Jung believed that the unconscious mind was not just a psychological basement full of trauma, all these boxes that we're avoiding, but it was also a living symbolic world. Think of when you clean your attic or you clean your basement or you clean even your bedroom, the memes where it's like, I got so deep into cleaning my bedroom, I found old things I forgot were here. And then you're wearing a crown from middle school years, you're reading the diary, you're listening to old mixtapes, whatever it is. That is also what he believed. It was full of symbolism, full of tools and secrets and things that can point us into why we are here, what we love. Because the personal unconscious, and he divided it into the personal unconscious and then the collective unconscious. And you also see that idea showing up with like the Toltec and with the Four Agreements book. If you've never read that, it's a very easy read. There's also the Mastery of Love, which is the third book because it's a 3-part series. I just personally have never read the second book, ironically enough, but I highly recommend reading that because he talks about the collective fear dream and then the collective love dream and that kind of stuff. But Carl Jung divided the unconscious into layers. And the first layer was the personal unconscious. And this includes forgotten memories. This includes suppressed emotion, denied parts of yourself, unresolved wounds, hidden fears, and shadow material. And the personal unconscious was very deeply connected to identity, which is why people who are unconscious, if you've been following along, you probably have heard me mention this before, they identify with their beliefs. And therefore, when you call out like bad theology in certain religions, people get very aggressive because they're identifying with these belief systems. They're identifying still with the conditional programming where their conditioning lives, and they haven't gone inward and started to deconstruct and put in new programs. And so with the personal unconscious, somebody may consciously want visibility, but unconsciously, they may be associating visibility with attack, humiliation, shame, and pressure. And so the unconscious then creates protective behaviors, hiding, perfectionism, procrastination, self-erasure, playing small, not because that person lacks potential or greatness, but because the unconscious mind is trying to avoid emotional pain. And this is also where the shadow comes in, because Carl Jung introduced one of his most famous concepts, and that's the shadow, because the shadow is every part of yourself that you learned was unsafe to embody. And this is what I talk about also like in my book, You Are Art, is on the other side of your greatest fears are your greatest blessings. Because your shadow is not just the bad things. I think sometimes when we hear the ego or the shadow, we assume, ooh, that's scary, that's evil, that's bad. And it's not. The ego has its purpose. It just shouldn't be in the driver's seat. It shouldn't be the master of your house. It should be the servant. And the shadow is also just equally as good. Strength is good when it's used for love and it's used to protect the innocent. but strength without love becomes tyranny. Your shadow very much can include your confidence, your ambition, your power, your creativity, your sensuality, your leadership, and your visibility. And many people suppress their greatness because at some point their nervous system that is deeply interconnected with their unconscious learned that it was safer to stay small. And the unconscious mind therefore practices that through self-sabotage. Even me with my YouTube. I wanted to hide. It felt safer because my unconscious had learned through experience that the emotional pain that came putting myself out there, I lost friendships that were important to me. And so for me, I learned, oh, I'm going to get rejected. I don't want to do this. This is going to be uncomfortable. But also on the other side of that greatest fear was my greatest blessing, was becoming monetized on YouTube, was actually achieving those dreams, was actually creating that community. And I've already gained new friendships out of it with people that actually have aligned beliefs and values and that want to actually grow along beside me. I just had to get over my own self-sabotage and self-fulfilling prophecy. But that's what we do when we are unconscious. We create those self-fulfilling prophecies. And Jung went even deeper than this, okay? He believed that in the personal, we each got our personal, because in also the physical realm, there's kind of 4 realms in which we exist, but 3 that we mainly talk about. In the physical realm, duality is very much the most noticeable, but that does not mean we are separate from anybody else. We are all interconnected, especially at source level. But on the physical realm, there's very much self-I. I'm a girl, you're a guy. I'm a Republican, you're a Democrat. I'm a liberal, you're a conservative. Oh, I'm black, you're white. There's very much the dualistic division, and that's also how people stay trapped in the lower realms. Either way, we have very much the personal, okay? We've got our personal dream going on of our belief systems and this, that, the other. But then under it, Carl Jung said that we had the collective, and we had very much the collective dream and unconscious. And this was one of his biggest contributions to psychology, is the collective dream work, because he noticed that the collective unconsciousness very much shared a symbolic layer of the human psyche. And he noticed across cultures all across the world, people repeatedly created similar myths, symbols, spiritual stories, archetypes, and dream imagery. And you see it across the board as somebody who studies esoteric work for a living. For example, the archetype story of Jesus that we have in our Bible. You also have Apollonisis. He was known as the Antichrist or the pagan Christ. You have Mirtha. You have Horus, and it just keeps going back. This collective conscious of symbols and stories, because symbols are the language of the soul. If you ever study tarot cards, your soul will pick out things on that card that stands out, and then you're supposed to sit with that. Well, why did that step out to me? What is my subconscious trying to tell me right now with this? Because symbols speak when the intellect does not have words. And so even civilizations separated by oceans, they shared similar symbolic patterns. Mesopotamia had the flood myth. The Jews have their flood myth. The Egyptians talked about it. Hell, even up in Wind Cave National Park, they very much have the Native American myth where the great mother, the great buffalo, led them into the caves and kept them safe from the flood. So Carl Jung, he believed that across humanity, they shared universal archetypes. You have the hero, the mother, the wise old man, the shadow, death and rebirth, the trickster, the divine child, virgin birth, divine child. Trickster, you see it with, let's say Loki in the Norse mythologies. You see it with very much Hermes, or you even have Dionysus. He's very much a trickster god, in my opinion. Okay, these archetypes influence behaviors beneath awareness, and this is why stories resonate so emotionally, even when they are symbolic. That is why you can read a story to somebody and every single person in that group can take something different away from that story based on where they are consciously and based on how much work they have done unconsciously and based on the programming that they still have autopilot running in their conditional mind. Okay, because the psyche recognizes itself through archetypes. The psyche recognizes itself through stories, and this is very much also the nervous system. And I want to talk more about the nervous system momentarily, because this is where modern neuroscience begins connecting back to Carl Jung's work. Your nervous system is constantly scanning for what feels familiar. It is designed to keep you alive and safe. Okay, you are a vessel. And so this was actually something, not to kind of a rabbit trail, it goes everywhere. When I started really practicing esoteric work and I really started fucking around to find out, I'd say, okay, God, I want this money now. I want to make this much money per month, or I want this much in this area, or I want this opportunity. And then I started to notice a pattern usually within like 1 to 3 days time, I would get a shit ton of anxiety. And I'd be like, where is this coming from? And then I would kind of hit that invisible wall, like Wild Coyote, and I'd be like, I know this shit works. I've seen it work more than once in my life. Why is it not working now? And I would start trying to figure out and solve the problem. I'd be problem solving and troubleshooting. And so I would consciously notice the anxiety. And so the one day I was just sitting there. I was like, where is this coming from? Why do I keep getting anxiety when I ask for stuff? And immediately I felt, you asked for more. And I'm like, what are you talking about? What do you mean I asked for more? And then it dawned on me, we create with energy. From Eve comes all of creation. You only have 2 things in existence: Eve, life; energy, atoms, matter. Okay? So Eve comes all life, energy. So if you are a vessel and you ask for more, you are going to get that energy first, because you are going to be tested to see if you are capable of holding the energy. Are you energetically capable of holding more? Because money is energy. So if you want more money, you're going to be tested with that in the vessel, and if you're able to sit with that, and if you're able to actually integrate that energy and to expand that vessel to become somebody capable and worthy of holding that good gift. And so as soon as I figured that out, it felt like everything is simple once you figure it out. But until you figure it out, it seems like the impossible task that you'll never solve. And as soon as I learned that and I started to learn to integrate that, shit started flowing. I don't fear it anymore. I didn't fear the creation process. I actually look forward to it when I'm like, okay, I want this now. And then when I get it, I have to be consciously aware, not to embody the emotional state of my old identity, but to bring on that new identity on board and to feel that familiar, It's like, I know I'm going to rodeo, okay? It's rodeo season. I know it. I have the tickets bought. I love the shows. I love watching the bull riding. And so I already have the identity. I know I'm going to do it. So I carry that identity with also the things that are yet to be seen with the physical eyes. Because your nervous system is constantly scanning for what feels familiar, not necessarily what is good for you. Abundance, expansion, that's good for you, but it's not familiar. So the nervous system, when you ask for more, it's going to be like, we've never held that amount before. I don't think we're capable of that. That feels really uncomfortable to me. And also when you ask people, like, so why do you feel unworthy of holding more money? Usually, the subconscious and unconscious will deflect. I don't know. I don't want to talk about that. But we have to face it to integrate it. So if your subconscious and your unconscious mind have learned that visibility is dangerous, that success creates attack, people take jabs at you, they try to humble you, that love creates pain or abundance creates guilt, then your body will resist expansion automatically, which is why growth feels very uncomfortable. Because you have to let go of anything that no longer serves you, because transformation is not about just changing the belief systems and thoughts. It is also changing the emotional, again, all this stored trauma, okay, these emotions, it's about changing the emotional associations with things, changing the identity, changing nervous system familiarity, integrating unconscious material, and becoming safe enough to embody. That's also why I very much talk about like the inner child, okay? We have to reparent our inner child. We have to reframe our perspectives on old memories. If we have a memory that was horrible for us, and we continually associate with that, well, then that's staying. That's the programming. But if we learn to regulate, then we change it, okay? So when we send love back to that inner child, so for example, one of my stories I've brought up before is at my 6th birthday, I had the worst birthday ever. It was very traumatizing for me. And so as I learned to regulate my system growing up and changing memories, I had to sit there and send love back to that child and change that. I'm like, hey, no, you are seen. It is safe to actually speak your voice and to get what you want out of life. You weren't wrong for saying, hey, I didn't want a chocolate cake. And so we have to actually reprogram the nervous system and recalibrate the associations with that. And that's also where one of Carl Jung's most famous quotes is he said, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. So you'll have that vision, and if you haven't worked through this unconscious, you'll keep hitting that invisible wall, and it's like, it's fate. I'm just not meant to have that. It's not God's will for me. That's what the Christians love to pull out. Only if it's God's will you get that. And it's like, wow, look at you, Debbie Doubter. Jesus said, believe ye have received, and ye shall receive. He didn't say that there was a limit to those blessings. There is no limit to the abundance of the universe, okay? God's not on a budget. And so we have to realize we are only limited by the limits we place on ourselves, because the Bible also says there is nothing impossible with God. And Carl Jung's quote also very much shows why so many people stay trapped in cycles they consciously want to escape. Ouroboros, snake eating the tail's head, yin and yang, beginning and end, alpha and omega. You will keep repeating the cycle until you evolve. And every time you avoid that trial and that test, it will repeat. Again, you will get into a relationship with somebody and the same issues will start showing up. So that relationship ends, you'll go to the next person. And then the same patterns will start showing up. And then you'll go to the next person. And then it's a dog returning to its vomit. That's what it is, okay? A dog that returneth to its vomit, the Bible says, because you keep repeating, because you refuse to actually acknowledge. And that is where awareness is not enough. Okay, you can be consciously aware of the pattern. You can be like, man, every time I get into a relationship, this shit happens. What is going on? You can be aware of the pattern, but you also must become conscious of your conditioning, your shadow, your nervous system patterns, your unconscious fears, and your identity attachments. Because only then can you stop unconsciously recreating the same reality. And that's where then in those experiences you're very conscious and aware of all the stuff you've got in your basement, what's all in these boxes. And you're able to be like, no, we're not gonna act like that. We're actually gonna invite ourselves into a new experience. This is safe. It is safe for me to hold money. It is safe for me to be in a loving, stable relationship. Not everybody else is out to get me like my parents were. And that's the thing. If you don't confront things, they will also show up in different relationships. It might not be a loving relationship. It might not be a partner, but it will be mother to best friend to partner. And in this repeating test, this Ouroboros will just keep repeating until you finally confront it and you evolve. You either repeat it or you evolve. Those are your choices. And most people, that's why they stay stuck. Nothing changes until something changes. And that's also where the quote comes in. You can't heal in an environment you got sick in. And now I'm not saying that it's impossible to change your reality and to change your mindset and your nervous system in the same reality. I get it. Not everybody can just be a nomad like moi. But what we do have to realize is even in those seasons that we can't maybe physically move from our house or our environment, we can't just quit our job and go get a different seasonal job. We have to learn to change the diet that we can. Stop listening to the same fucking music. Stop listening to the negative news. Stop listening to those same people constantly bitch and gossip about whatever it is they are at work. Okay, start reading different books, start watching different shows, start filling your life in your conscious active awareness, which will then, whatever you sow, you will reap, okay? So start sowing different things, because when you start changing the habits and you start changing the patterns, you will start changing the results. 2 + 2 always equals 4. If you want 5, you got to go 2 + 3. Okay, and that might mean also putting down boundaries with toxic family members, because not everybody is in your best interest. I'm just saying. Okay, and energy does not lie. Start noticing how your body reacts around people. If you feel drained to go see somebody, you probably shouldn't have them in your life. If you dread going to family dinner every week, then why? Why are you going? What emotional belief system in conditioning do you have saying that you have to go do that? Oh, I should do that. Oh, I have to do that. No, you could do that. Free will, my friend. Because you're not broken. Just because your subconscious and unconscious mind resist change does not mean you cannot change. And just because your system learned survival before it learned expansion does not mean you can't heal and change that. It does not mean we can learn to regulate this and completely change our lives. If there is a will, there is a way. You can absolutely heal. You can absolutely change your life. But healing is learning that it's safe to be seen, that it's safe to succeed, that it's safe to become something more, that we can leave our old territory, leave that old land, that land of bondage, okay, leave those limiting beliefs, and that it's also safe to receive. And I think sometimes that's also very much the hardest thing for a lot of people, especially if you grew up in that lower poverty, middle class kind of income, that blue collar life. You were probably taught beliefs: don't accept handouts. You got to work hard for your money. You got to work hard for what you want in life. Money doesn't grow on trees. And so it's uncomfortable to receive. But if you can't even receive a compliment from somebody, you can't receive somebody's help, holding open a door or helping you with a task. How are you supposed to receive that energy? How are you supposed to receive that money? You say, I want this. Life says okay, but then you're rejecting it because you haven't learned to heal and know that it's safe to receive. And that's part of nervous system regulation, because you are art, and a part of becoming art consciously is learning how to stop letting unconscious patterns paint your life and create your life for you.